The dog did something every night when the baby slept. It was exactly 2:13 a.m. when Sarah's blood ran cold. The house was completely silent, wrapped in the heavy stillness of a Tuesday night. Sarah, exhausted from the endless cycle of newborn feedings, had just drifted into a light sleep, but a strange, rhythmic scratching sound pulled her awake. She reached for the glowing screen of the baby monitor on her nightstand, her eyes struggling to adjust to the harsh blue light. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. A large, dark shadow was looming over her newborn son's crib. It was Buster, their golden retriever. But Buster wasn't sleeping on the rug like he usually did. He was standing on his hind legs, his front paws resting directly on the edge of the crib, staring down at little baby Leo. He wasn't moving. He wasn't blinking. He was just standing there like a silent, furry sentinel in the dark. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs. She nudged her husband, Mark. "Mark, look," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark squinted at the screen. "He's just checking on him. Honey, go back to sleep?" Mark mumbled, already half asleep again. But Sarah couldn't sleep. She watched the monitor for another 20 minutes. Buster didn't move an inch. He just stared. And the most terrifying part? When Sarah checked the monitor the next night, and the night after that, the exact same thing happened. Every single night, at the exact same time, the dog did something unimaginable. This is a story of a family, a newborn baby, and a dog whose strange nighttime ritual held a secret that would change their lives forever. The gentle giant. To understand why Buster's behavior was so unsettling, you have to understand who Buster was. Buster was a 5-year-old golden retriever, and he was by all accounts the laziest, goofiest, and most relaxed dog on the planet. He spent his days chasing sunlight across the living room floor, napping on the couch, and occasionally lifting his head to beg for a dropped piece of cheese from the kitchen counter. When Sarah and Mark found out they were expecting their first child, they naturally had some concerns. How would Buster react to a new baby? Would he be jealous? Would he be too rough? Golden retrievers are known for being excellent family dogs, but Buster was incredibly clumsy. He was 100 pounds of pure fluff and uncoordinated paws. During Sarah's pregnancy, Buster seemed completely unaware of the impending change. He still demanded his belly rubs, and he still slept at the foot of their bed every night, snoring loudly. Then baby Leo arrived. The day they brought Leo home from the hospital, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Mark carried the car seat into the living room, and Sarah nervously called Buster over. "Gentle Buster," she cautioned. "Meet your new little brother." Buster approached slowly. His tail wasn't wagging. Instead, it was tucked slightly, his ears pinned back in pure concentration. He sniffed a tiny bundle of blankets, his wet nose twitching. Then he let out a soft, long sigh, sat down right next to the car seat, and rested his chin on the floor. From that moment on, Buster was no longer the lazy, clumsy dog they knew. He had a job. He was Leo's protector. The shift in behavior. For the first few weeks, Buster's protective nature was endearing. If Leo cried in his swing, Buster would immediately trot over and gently lick the baby's tiny toes until Sarah or Mark arrived. If a stranger came to the door, Buster would place himself firmly between the front door and the bassinet, letting out a low, warning boof, a sound he had never made before in his life. Sarah and Mark thought it was sweet. "Look at him," Mark would smile. "He's the best nanny we could have asked for." But as the weeks turned into a couple of months, Buster's behavior began to shift from sweet to bordering on obsessive. It started with him refusing to sleep in Sarah and Mark's bedroom. For 5 years, Buster had never spent a night away from a spot at the foot of their bed. But once Leo was moved from the bassinet in the parents' room to the crib in his own nursery, Buster relocated too. He took up residence on the small circular rug right in front of Leo's crib. "I guess he just wants to be near the baby," Sarah told Mark, though she felt a tiny pang of sadness missing her furry foot warmer. But then came the nights of the staring. After that first terrifying night where Sarah saw Buster standing over the crib at 2:13 a.m., she became obsessed with watching the monitor. Night after night, the routine was identical. The clock would strike 2 a.m. Buster would be asleep on the rug. Around 2:10 a.m., he would stir, his ears perking up in the dark. At 2:13 a.m., he would stand up, place his massive paws gently on the railing of the crib, and lean his head over the sleeping baby. Sometimes he would whine softly, a high-pitched, anxious sound. Sometimes he would gently nudge the baby's blanket with his nose. But mostly he just watched, unblinking, intense. Growing paranoia. "It's not normal, Mark," Sarah said one morning over coffee. She had dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept a full night in weeks. Not because of the baby, but because she was too busy watching the dog watch the baby. "He's a dog, Sarah." "Dogs do weird things," Mark reasoned, though he looked a little uneasy himself. Maybe he hears a mouse in the wall. Maybe he just likes the smell of baby lotion. For 20 minutes, every single night, staring directly at his face. Sarah's voice rose in panic. What if he gets too close? What if he accidentally smothers him? He weighs 100 pounds, Mark. If he falls into that crib... She couldn't finish the sentence. The thought was too horrifying. They decided to consult their veterinarian, Dr. Evans. They explained Buster's intense fixation, the specific timing and the strange, rigid posture he adopted over the crib. Dr. Evans listened carefully, taking notes. "Golden retrievers are incredibly empathetic creatures," she explained. "They have senses we can't even begin to fathom. Their sense of smell is 10,000 to 100,000 times as acute as ours. They can smell chemical changes in the human body. Has Leo been sick?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "He had his 2-month checkup last week. The pediatrician said he's perfectly healthy, growing like a weed. It could just be a new behavioral quirk," Dr. Evans suggested, "a manifestation of a protective instinct. If you are worried about the baby's safety, the simplest solution is to lock Buster out of the nursery at night." It sounded like practical advice. But when they tried it that night, it was a disaster. Mark closed the nursery door, leaving Buster in the hallway. By 1 a.m., the whining started. By 1:30 a.m., Buster was scratching frantically at the wood of the door. By 2 a.m., he was throwing his entire body weight against the door, barking a frantic, distress howl that woke up the entire house, including the baby. Defeated, Mark opened the door. Buster sprinted into the room, went straight to the crib, stood on his hind legs, and did a frantic visual sweep of the crying baby. Only when he was satisfied that Leo was there did he finally calm down. "We can't lock him out," Mark said, exhausted. "It stresses him out too much." "Then I need to know what he's looking at," Sarah said, determination replacing her fear. "Tonight, I'm not watching through the monitor. I'm going to be in the room." Paw Prince, do you have a furry hero at home? Have you ever noticed your pet acting strangely, only to realize they were trying to tell you something important? Animals have an incredible sixth sense. Let us know your amazing pet stories in the comments section below. And if you love heartwarming tales about the bond between humans and animals, make sure to bookmark this page and share this article with a fellow dog lover. The stakeout. The next night, Sarah prepared for her stakeout. She fed Leo, rocked him to sleep, and placed him gently in his crib around 8 p.m. Buster immediately took his position on the rug. Instead of going back to her own bedroom, Sarah dragged a comfortable armchair into the corner of the nursery, hidden in the shadows. She brought a blanket and a thermos of coffee. She was determined to stay awake. The hours ticked by slowly. The house settled into its nighttime rhythm. The refrigerator hummed downstairs. The wind rustled the oak tree outside the window. Buster slept soundly, his legs occasionally twitching as he chased dream squirrels. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m. At 2:05 a.m., Sarah's eyelids were incredibly heavy. She took a sip of lukewarm coffee to jolt herself awake. At 2:10 a.m., just like clockwork, Buster's ears twitched. His eyes snapped open. He didn't stretch or yawn like a dog normally waking up. He went from 0 to high alert in a fraction of a second. Sarah held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the shadows of the armchair. Buster stood up. He walked silently to the edge of the crib. He placed his paws on the top rail and lifted his heavy head to look inside. Sarah watched his body language. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't hunting. He looked worried. Buster let out a very soft, high-pitched whine. He lowered his snout into the crib and gently nudged Leo's shoulder. Leo didn't move. Buster nudged him again, a little harder this time. "Whine," Sarah was about to stand up and intervene, afraid the dog would wake the baby. But then, in the absolute quiet of the room, Sarah realized something terrifying. She couldn't hear the baby breathing. Usually, Leo was a noisy sleeper. He made soft little grunts and sighs. But right now, the crib was dead silent. Panic surged through Sarah like an electric shock. She threw the blanket off and practically dove across the room. She shoved Buster out of the way. The dog yielded immediately, taking a step back, but keeping his eyes locked on the baby. Sarah looked down at Leo. In the dim light of the street lamp filtering through the blinds, she could see his tiny face. His lips looked slightly blue. His chest was completely still. "Leo!" Sarah screamed, her voice tearing through the silence of the house. She reached into the crib and scooped the baby up. He felt limp. "Leo, wake up! Mark! Mark!" As Sarah jostled the baby in her arms, screaming his name, little Leo suddenly gasped. It was a harsh, ragged sound, like a swimmer finally breaking the surface of the water. He took a huge gulp of air, his little chest expanding, and then he let out a furious, deafening wail. Mark burst into the room seconds later, terrified. "What? What happened?" Sarah collapsed onto the floor, clutching her crying, breathing baby to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Buster stepped forward and gently licked the tears off Sarah's cheek, his tail finally giving a slow, relieved wag. "He stopped breathing, Mark," Sarah sobbed, rocking the baby. "He stopped breathing." Buster knew. Buster woke him up. Chapter 5. The Hospital Rush. They didn't wait for the morning. Mark grabbed the diaper bag while Sarah kept Leo bundled in her arms, and they sped to the emergency room at the local children's hospital. The triage nurses took them and immediately based on a report of a newborn ceasing to breathe. They hooked tiny Leo up to a barrage of monitors, heart rate, oxygen saturation, breathing rate. For hours, doctors ran tests. They checked his heart, his lungs, his brain activity. Through it all, Leo seemed perfectly fine. He was alert, hungry, and annoyed by the wires attached to his chest. Finally, a pediatric specialist, Dr. Aris, came into the room with a chart. "So, here is what we're looking at," Dr. Aris said kindly, pulling up a chair. "Physically, Leo is structurally very healthy. However, based on your description of the event and some of the data we capture on the monitors while he dozed just now, we believe Leo is experiencing infant sleep apnea." Sarah and Mark held hands, listening intently. It means that during deep sleep cycles, his brain temporarily forgets to send a signal to his lungs to breathe. It causes a pause in breathing. Usually, babies startle themselves awake and start breathing again. But sometimes the pause lasts too long, oxygen levels drop, and it can be incredibly dangerous. We call them apneas. But why was it happening at the exact same time every night? Mark asked. "Sleep cycles are very rhythmic," Dr. Aris explained. "Babies enter different phases of sleep at regular intervals. It seems that around 2 a.m., Leo was entering his deepest phase of REM sleep, which is when these apneic episodes are most likely to occur." Sarah looked at Mark, tears brimming in her eyes. "Buster," Dr. Aris raised an eyebrow. "Buster? Our dog," Sarah explained, her voice thick with emotion. "Every night at 2:13 a.m., he would stand over the crib. We thought he was just being weird. We thought he might be dangerous. But tonight he nudged Leo. He nudged him right when he stopped breathing. It woke Leo up just enough to make him gasp for air." Dr. Aris paused, letting the chart lower to his lap. A soft smile touched his face. "Dogs have incredibly acute senses. They can hear a heartbeat. They can hear the rhythm of breathing. And, as I mentioned, they can smell chemical changes. When oxygen levels drop in the blood, the body's chemistry changes slightly. Your dog likely heard the breathing stop, smelled the change in the baby, and his instinct told him to intervene." The doctor looked directly at Sarah and Mark. "You are very lucky. Infant sleep apnea can be silent and deadly. Without a medical monitor, parents rarely catch it until it's too late. I don't say this lightly, but your dog very likely saved your son's life tonight, and probably on previous nights as well." Chapter 6. The Hero Returns. They spent 3 days in the hospital. Leo was fitted with a special medical-grade sleep monitor that's strapped around his chest or ankle. If his breathing paused for more than 10 seconds, an alarm would sound, loud enough to wake the dead. When they finally brought Leo home, the house felt different. The fear that had been hanging over Sarah was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude. When they walked to the front door, Buster was waiting. He had been frantic while they were gone, pacing the house and refusing to eat his kibble. As soon as he saw the car seat, he let out a joyous bark and ran over, his whole body wiggling with happiness. He sniffed Leo thoroughly, investigating the new wires and the monitor attached to the baby's leg. Sarah knelt down on the floor, ignoring her exhaustion. She threw her arms around Buster's thick, furry neck and buried her face in his golden coat. She cried all over again, but this time they were tears of pure joy and profound gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered into his fur, holding the massive dog tightly. "Thank you, you good boy. You saved my baby." Buster simply let out a happy pant, licked her ear, and then trotted over to the car seat to resume his guard duty. An unbreakable bond. Life returned to a new normal. The medical monitor became a standard part of Leo's bedtime routine. It brought Sarah and Mark immense peace of mind. They no longer had to stay awake staring at a video screen in terror. But old habits die hard. Even with the loud medical-grade alarm attached to the baby, Buster did not abandon his post. He still slept on the circular rug in the nursery. And while he no longer stood over the crib in agonizing anxiety every single night, he remained ever vigilant. If the medical monitor ever let out a warning beep, signaling a brief pause in breathing, Buster would be on his feet before Sarah and Mark even made it out of bed, his nose pressed to the crib slats, making sure his tiny human was okay. As the months passed, Leo grew stronger. By the time he was a year old, his neurological system had matured, and the infant sleep apnea resolved itself completely. The doctors gave the all-clear to remove the monitor. Leo learned to crawl, then to walk. And everywhere the toddler went, a massive golden shadow followed closely behind. If Leo tripped on the carpet, Buster was there to offer a soft flank to lean on. If Leo dropped his crackers, Buster was more than happy to clean up the mess. They became inseparable. They shared toys, they shared snacks, and they shared a bond that was forged in the quiet, terrifying hours of the night. Sarah often looked back on those first few months. She thought about how close they came to locking Buster out of the room. She thought about how easy it is for humans to misunderstand the intentions of animals. We often project our own human anxieties onto them, assuming they are acting out of jealousy or bad behavior, when in reality, they are operating on a level of instinct and empathy that we cannot fully comprehend. Buster wasn't just a pet. He was Leo's guardian angel, dressed in a golden fur coat, who didn't need words to say, "I've got you, little one." The hidden wisdom of animals. Stories like Buster's are not as uncommon as we might think. Throughout history, there have been countless accounts of animals displaying extraordinary intuition when it comes to human health and safety. Dogs, in particular, have evolved alongside humans for thousands of years. They have learned to read our facial expressions, understand our tone of voice, and tune into our physical well-being. Today, we have service dogs trained specifically to detect seizures before they happen, sniffing out the subtle chemical changes in their owner's breath. We have dogs that can detect dangerous drops in blood sugar for diabetics. We even have dogs being trained to sniff out early-stage cancers. But what makes Buster's story so special is that he wasn't a highly trained medical alert dog. He was just a goofy, clumsy, lazy family pet. Nobody taught him what to do. Nobody trained him to recognize the signs of apnea. He acted entirely out of love, instinct, and an unbreakable devotion to his pack. He knew something was wrong with the newest, most vulnerable member of his family, and he took it upon himself to keep watch when the humans were asleep. It is a humbling reminder that we share this planet with incredibly intelligent, sensitive creatures. They may not speak our language, but they communicate with us every day through their actions, their loyalty, and their unwavering presence. The next time your dog stares at you a little too intensely or refuses to leave your side when you're feeling down, pay attention. They might just be seeing something or sensing something that you cannot. A family complete. Years later, when Leo was 5 years old, he would often sit on the living room floor, leaning back against a now very gray, very slow Buster. The dog was 10 years old, his muzzle white, his joints stiff, but his eyes still held that same intense, protective love whenever he looked at the boy. Sarah and Mark would watch them together, their hearts full. They knew that the time they had left with Buster was growing short, as is the tragic nature of the lifespan of dogs. But they also knew that the legacy of what Buster did would live on forever. He didn't just give them their son's life. He taught them a profound lesson about trust, intuition, and the miraculous, unspoken bond between humans and the animals who love them. Buster lived to be almost 12 years old. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, his head was resting right where it always belonged, on the rug at the foot of Leo's bed. He stood his watch until the very end. Paw prints, what would you do without your best friend? Our pets give us everything they have. Their love, their loyalty, and sometimes they even save our lives. Animals have a beautiful, quiet way of watching over us when we least expect it. Did this story touch your heart? Share this article with your friends, family, and every dog lover you know to remind them the incredible, life-saving bond between humans and their furry companions. We want to hear from you. Have you ever had a pet that protected you or your family? What makes your dog or cat your personal hero? Drop a comment below and join the conversation. Don't forget to give your furry best friend an extra big hug today.